Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from the Frontier, and thank you for stopping by. I really like this photograph I took of the Maputo evening in Mozambique when I was visiting last week, looking outside my hotel window over at the Indian Ocean. And my home thoughts return to a book I've now finished, Mao 2 by Delillo. But she missed simple things. Parents' birthdays, a rug underfoot, nights when she didn't have to sleep in a zipped bag. She began to think she was inadequate to the strict, plain shapes of churchly faith. Head pains hit her at the end of the day. They came with a shining and electrochemical sheen. Light from out of nowhere, brain-made, the eerie gleam of who you are. Another paragraph, in committing a work to memory, we make it safe from decay. It stands untouched. Children memorize parts of stories their parents tell them. They want the same story again and again. Don't change a word or they get terribly upset. This is the unchanged narrative every culture needs in order to survive. In societies reduced to blur and glut, terror is the only meaningful act. There's too much everything, more things and messages and meanings that we can use in 10,000 lifetimes. Inertia, hysteria. Is history possible? Is anyone serious? Who do we take serious? Only the lethal believer, the person who kills and dies for faith. Everything else is absorbed. The artist is absorbed. The madman in the street is absorbed and processed and incorporated. Give him $1, put him in a TV commercial. Only the terrorists stand outside. The culture hasn't figured out how to assimilate him. It's confusing when they kill the innocent, but this is precisely the language of being noticed, the only language the West understands, the way they determine how we see them, the way they dominate the rush of endless streaming images. It's a brilliant book. I'm coincidentally reading it at the same time, of course, as the anniversary of Tiananmen Square. I'm going to put up that photograph I took of the snow peaks of Kilimanjaro, which I quite like, and start my political reflections with that quote from Richard Kapuscinski: "If the crowd disperses, goes home, does not reassemble, we say the revolution is over." BBC World Service have been retelling the story of events in and around Tiananmen Square in Beijing 25 years ago via the hashtag Tiananmen89. And then on the 3rd of June 1989, on the evening, the army was ordered to clear Beijing city centre, and citizens were told to stay at home. On 3rd June, troops were forced back, trying to retake the square. I'll put up a photograph of the General Secretary Zhao Ziyang, who called for compromise, and that was his last public appearance. And then refer you to a slideshow which is linked on Rich Wrap-Ups that I found on the New Yorker. And of course I'll post one of the most iconic photographs of all, which is of the man trying to stop the tanks. FT chart of the day yesterday was the EU's dependence on Russian gas. American suicide bomber in Syria raises fears for US. As Mona Mohammed Abusalha packed explosives into a truck last month to embark on a suicide attack, his family in Florida was apparently unaware that he had even wandered into Syria's civil war. US officials said that dozens of fighters from the US and much larger numbers from Europe and the Middle East all but disappear from view once they are inside Syria's borders. It's a bit of a black hole, a US counterterrorism official said. We don't have a lot of collection here. US officials described Syria as a daunting environment for espionage. The CIA pulled its people out of Syria when the US embassy was closed as the conflict moved toward a civil war. Amid estimates that as many as 12,000 foreigners have flocked to Syria, the opaque nature of the conflict has complicated efforts to determine how many might have become dangerously radicalized, or to account for them if and when they return home. And this is clearly a big risk. Martin Reardon is calling it a game changer. It drives home the threat of foreign fighters. What happens when they go home? And there's another report that Time have got as well, which is talking about the same thing. And I think, this is something Bashar Assad, for all his vilification, was, said. He said, once they get tired of fighting me in Syria, they'll come and fight you. And I don't think he's right. He's wrong. This was an interesting comment. The progression from foreign fighter to terrorist is not a linear one, nor is it inevitable. The majority of people who return from the fighting in Syria may pose no terrorist threat. The difficulty remains how to distinguish those who will from those who won't. A very interesting piece about Bring Back Our Girls in The Guardian, and I just read you one sentence. In the 21st century, the CNN effect has been replaced by the Twitter effect. Apparently, the Boeing 747 is only good for the US president as the jumbo era ends. US citing new hope for Somalia is to name Somalia ambassador. Currency markets, euro just above 136 at 136.09. It fell on May 29th to 135.86, which was the weakest since February 13th. Dollar index 80.65 has gained some strength against the peripherals. However, Japanese yen 102.70. The dollar is at a month high versus the yen. Swissy 0.8979, pound 167.24, Aussie 0.9268. India rupee has softened further to 59.42. South Korean won 10.2360. Rial 227.94. Egyptian pound stable at 7.1507. And the rand at 10.7595 dropped 0.7% yesterday and has been on the slide in the last few sessions. The dollar has appreciated 1.3% in the past month. Yen has advanced 0.7%. Euro has dropped 0.8%. The dollar strength has been very inversely correlated to euro weakness. I'll put up a 3-month chart of the dollar index. We're pushed through the top of the range. We did this previously, but this time what's supporting the move is a backup in US Treasury yields, with the 10-year yield now at 2.6%. Euro dollar 136.09. Euro area inflation slowed to an annualized 0.5% in May from 0.7% in April. ECB's goal is just below 2%. I incline to the view I received from Lorenzo Bin Smaghi at the conference I attended in Milan, when he said there is a consensus, and in his view the trigger gets pulled this month. UK house prices have now surpassed the 2007 peak to hit a new record, and I wrote about this on the 12th of August 2013 when I said there is an outside chance that UK property, which is projected to rally 25% over 5 years, achieves that in 24 to 30 months. Gold is at 1245.08, price touched 1240.20, which was the lowest price for a most active contract since January 31, but the low volumes trading was 42% below the average for the past 100 days. Gold had previously dropped in the previous 6 sessions, the longest slump since August 6th. I for one think it's headed lower. Crude oil at 102.78, and we're above 100. I think it's expensive above this level, but I think the situation in Libya is probably the swing, which has squeezed the price higher. Plus, it seemed we had a lot of Chinese buying. South African all shares up 7.955% this year, below $50,000 rand. Put up a 6-month chart, as I said, that's been softening up of late, 10.75.75. It's going to be interesting. We've got to keep an eye on that. Egyptian pound 7.1503. Egyptian stock market up 17.413% this year, but back below 8,000. Nigerian all share up 0.1645% this year. Bloomberg has a story about the Naira being in focus as Amefili begins his central bank job in Nigeria. And the Naira has dropped 1.4% against the dollar this year, trading at 162.49 last. Reserves have slumped 15% this year to $37 billion. Crude makes up about 80% of government revenue. And clearly, the performance of Nigerian asset markets was very robust, actually, given all that bad news. The stock market rallied about 10%. The Naira, once it sort of blipped just shy of 170, subsequently improved. But one senses with the Naira, it's like putting a finger in the dike. Ghana Stock Exchange is up 8.298% this year, but of course you've lost all those returns plus some because of the SEDI. Ghana says its 3-year bond was oversubscribed at 24.44%. Can you imagine borrowing at that sort of rate? Interesting article that I found on Wall Street Journal. Between 2012 and 2013, the mobile data use doubled in sub-Saharan Africa. And that figure is forecast to nearly double year on year over most of the next 6 years, according to a report released Tuesday. Sub-Saharan Africa's mobile penetration of 70% is fast approaching the global rate of 92%, says Ericsson. Big numbers don't happen automatically, said the head of Sub-Saharan Africa at Ericsson. In addition to more cooperation, Ericsson says data prices need to come down further. The cost of smartphones needs to decrease in rural areas where 75% of the population lives. Needs to get more ICT coverage, and I think all those things will happen in reasonably short order. I mean, I can see smartphones being sold for less than $80 these days. I wrote that piece, Mozambique could be the next Qatar on the 2nd of June. The link is on Rich Wrap-Ups, as is the link for Christine Lagarde's Mindspeak session, which was held in January. EU to lift sanctions against Zimbabwe. The European Union's head of delegation in Zimbabwe has indicated the bloc will lift all sanctions against the country after President Robert Mugabe's government indicated it was reviewing its policies. There's been a real trend change in the language coming out of ZANU-PF. Ambassador Aldo Del Arricchia told journalists during a tour of agricultural projects in southern Zimbabwe the EU would meet on November 1st to review the embargo. The messages that are coming from the Zimbabwe government on the highest level are constructive, he was quoted by saying. We are happy that there is now a realization that in implementing the indigenization and economic empowerment policy, the one-size-fits-all approach does not work. And I wrote about this when I said, on the 3rd of June, you will note a linguistic inflection point in Zimbabwe of late. And I was pitting that down to Dominica, who's been visiting lately. Portugal indebted to Angola after economic reversal of fortune. And this is about the different fortunes, talking about there was no doubt about the firm handshake, but the smile looked a bit forced. The date was 17th November 2011, the place Luanda. Pedro Passos Coelho, the Portuguese premier, had just completed talks with the president of Angola, José Eduardo dos Santos, sealing agreement that was both a boon for Portugal and deeply humiliating. 6 months earlier, Portugal, verging on bankruptcy, received a €78 billion loan from the European Union and IMF. In exchange, Lisbon agreed to radical austerity measures, leaving the population poorer and sapping the welfare state. In a curious reversal of fortunes, the former colonial power was in poor shape. but its ex-colony, finally at peace, was awash with oil dollars. Maybe Angola will colonize us now, says Vasco Lourenço, the head of Associação 25 de Abril, an organization that is trying to preserve the spirit of the 1974 revolution. Saying the conflict has moved to another front, all about the economy. Angola is looking for recognition and makes it very clear where the money is, sometimes to the point of humiliation, says French historian Yves Leonard. Very interesting piece in The Guardian about that. Of course, there are about 100,000 Portuguese nationals living in Angola, and plenty of them in Mozambique as well. And on the panel that I was moderating in Maputo, I was sat next to the Minister for the Economy in Portugal, interesting fellow. German trade with Africa totaled $60 billion last year. The German firms do 2% of their overseas business in Africa. But obviously the Germans, they've got some Go Africa program, plus we got the ex-president Kohler turning up, I think, today or tomorrow, signalling a desire to have a deeper engagement. Berlin Conference of 1884 launched the first scramble for Africa, and Kaiser Wilhelm's Weltpolitik began a colonial experiment that led to the genocide of the Hereros in southwest Africa, now Namibia, and ended with defeat in the First World War. Even so, it has little colonial baggage compared with some other European countries, which could be an advantage in a region often sceptical about post-colonial powers and asset stripping, as Chancellor Angela Merkel looks for a geopolitical role to match with German economic might. Kenyan officers in the coastal town of Lamu allegedly, according to the BBC, provided an armed escort to an unknown white woman, largely believed to be Samantha Lewthwaite, who disappeared after her attempts to enter Somalia were blocked by immigration officials. The Kenya shilling was last trading at 87.461 and might well rally further because we now know that they're on the roadshow for that Eurobond. Roadshow started the 5th of June. And I wrote about this on the 26th of May when I said, the shilling closed at a 2.5-year low on May 20th. It printed a trade above 88 against the dollar only last week, and I was referring to May. But I was saying then it's always difficult to unpick cause and effect, and insecurity has been undercutting asset prices. But you will have noted the shilling, and I'm saying that this is a period of secular weakness for the shilling as full year dividends are upstream to parent companies. And on balance and subject to security issues staying on the trend line, then the shilling should improve from here. We've seen a bit of an improvement. Nairobi all shares up 9.1255% this year, 2.325% below a record high set in May. NSE 20 down 1.223% and at 3-month lows. I visited the Kenya Airways yesterday. They did a bit of film with the lady pilot, first lady African pilot to fly a Dreamliner, and I took a photograph whilst I was in the cockpit. ARM targets October start for shilling 26 billion cement plant. Will break ground for its 26 billion shilling Kitui factory in October, said its CEO Pradeep Panrana. They're going to produce more cement there. It will have the capacity to produce 8,000 tons of cement per day, placing it ahead of Nigeria's Dangote Cement that is also set to build the $400 million plant in Kitui to churn out 5,500 tons daily. Yesterday we had a very big session at the stock exchange. It clocked 1.906 billion shillings worth of turnover. Kakuzi rallied 7.53%. It's now up 65.263% in 2014. Big bull move. Safaricom traded 44.054 million shares worth 565.643 million. Whilst it remains up 17.97% in 2014, it's 2.66% below an all-time high, set on more than 3 occasions in May. Scan Group traded a huge block of shares, 11.634 million, which is 3.0707% of the company, and it edged lower to close at 47.50. Equity Bank, which had surged 15.8722% 4 weeks through yesterday morning, ticked lower on a slight bit of profit taking. KCB closed softer yesterday, but it's been trading this 45, 49.50 range pretty much all year. EABL strong buying when it slipped towards the 270 level, now at 283. Express rallied 8.29% yesterday, and that's rallied 96.15% of this year. It is an exemplar of what has been a very strong outperformance by the small cap stocks at the Nairobi Securities Exchange. Once again, thank you for stopping by.